He painted her portrait in secret, the struggling black artist and the judge's daughter who posed in moonlight. The wrought iron gate squeaked as Dante Brooks slipped through it at 2:47 a.m., his backpack heavy with brushes and canvas boards. The riverside park overlooking Charleston Harbor wasn't technically closed at night, but the "no loitering after dark" signs made his presence feel criminal. He didn't care. Moonlight on water didn't wait for business hours. He'd been coming here for 6 weeks now, ever since the third gallery rejection letter arrived. "Your work lacks commercial viability," they'd written, which Dante had learned was code for too black, too real, too uncomfortable for our white buyers. So he'd stopped trying to paint what they wanted and started painting what called to him, the way moonlight transformed the harbor into liquid silver, the shadows of old oak trees telling stories of a city built on stolen labor, the jasmine-scented air mixed with salt from the harbor as Dante set up his easel near his usual spot, a stone bench hidden behind a magnolia tree. At 28, he'd spent a decade chasing validation from galleries that looked at his brown skin before his portfolio. Dante had just started mixing titanium white with Prussian blue when he heard it, the sharp crack of a branch behind him. "You know this park closes at sunset, right?" He spun around, heart hammering. A white woman stood 10 feet away, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing running clothes despite the ungodly hour. But what stopped Dante cold wasn't her sudden appearance. It was the way moonlight hit her face, creating the exact play of light and shadow he'd been trying to capture for weeks. "I could ask you the same thing," Dante said, forcing his voice steady. Pretty dangerous for a woman to be running alone at 3 a.m. She stepped closer, and he noticed the pepper spray clipped to her waistband. "I'm a black belt, and I asked first. I'm painting." He gestured to his half-finished canvas. "The light's better at night. Less judgment." Her eyes moved from him to the painting, and something shifted in her expression. "You're the artist, the one who painted the series on King Street, the grandmother's hands, the church choir, the barber shop." Dante blinked. "You've seen my work? I own 2 of them. Bought them before the gallery took them down." She moved closer, studying his canvas. "They said your work was divisive. I thought it was honest." Something in Dante's chest loosened. 6 months of rejection, of being told his perspective didn't matter. And here was a stranger who'd not only seen his work, but bought it. "I'm Dante Brooks." He extended his hand, realizing too late it was covered in paint. She smiled, shaking it anyway. "Claire Hendricks. And before you ask, yes, Judge Robert Hendricks is my father. No, we don't agree on much." The name hit Dante like ice water. Judge Hendricks, the man who'd sentenced his cousin, Marcus, to 8 years for possession while a white college kid got probation for the same charge. The man who'd ruled against every racial discrimination lawsuit that crossed his bench. "Your father," Dante said carefully, pulling his hand back, "sentenced my cousin to nearly a decade in prison for something white boys do every weekend at frat parties." Claire's face fell, but she didn't look away. "I know. I've read every case. That's why I run at 3 a.m. instead of sleeping. Hard to rest when your father's legacy is other people's nightmares." The honesty startled him. Most white people deflected, made excuses, changed the subject. Claire just stood there in the moonlight, owning it. "So what? You collect black art to ease your conscience?" The words came out harsher than intended. "No," she said quietly. "I collect your art because it's the only thing in this city that tells the truth. Everything else is pretty lies about magnolia trees and Southern charm while pretending slavery and Jim Crow never happened. Your paintings refuse to pretend." Dante studied her face, trying to find the lie, the performance. But her eyes held something he recognized, the exhaustion of fighting a system that benefits you while destroying others. "Why are you really running at 3 a.m.? he asked. Claire looked out at the harbor. "Because my father's throwing a gala next week, celebrating his 30th year on the bench. Every lawyer, every politician, every person who's built their career on this broken system will be there, toasting a man who's destroyed lives. And I have to smile through it because I'm Judge Hendricks' daughter." She turned back to him, and in the moonlight, Dante saw something that made his fingers itch for a brush. Not just beauty, but conflict made visible. "Paint me," Claire said suddenly. "What?" "Paint me. Here, in moonlight. Not some polite portrait my father would approve of. Paint the truth. Hello, the shade of love, family." This story explores art as resistance and forbidden connection across the color line in Charleston. Before we continue, have you witnessed how black artists get told their truth is too divisive, while white artists get called bold? Drop a if this rings familiar. Let's aim for 100 comments. Your voices matter. Hit that like button if you're ready for this important journey. Dante didn't sleep after leaving the park. He lay in his studio apartment in North Charleston, staring at the water-stained ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Claire Hendricks, daughter of the man Dante considered a living symbol of systemic racism, wanted him to paint her portrait. His phone buzzed at 7 a.m. A text from his grandmother. Sunday dinner at 1. Bring your appetite and stop hiding in that studio. Dante smiled despite his exhaustion. His grandmother, Dorothy Brooks, had raised him after his mother died when he was 12. She'd worked 3 jobs to keep him in art classes, had framed his first terrible crayon drawing like it was a Picasso, had believed in him when no one else did. He rolled out of bed and looked around his apartment, a cramped space above a laundromat where the constant rumble of dryers provided white noise. His paintings covered every wall, propped against furniture, stacked in corners. A decade of work that galleries refused to show because they made white viewers uncomfortable. The painting of his grandmother's hands sat on his easel, the one Patricia Whitmore had rejected. He'd captured every wrinkle, every scar from hot stoves and harsh cleaning chemicals, every story those hands contained. They were hands that had picked cotton as a child in rural South Carolina, hands that had scrubbed white folks' floors, hands that had loved and fed and fought for her family. Too specific, the gallery owner had said. Translation, too black. Dante's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This is Claire. Meet me tonight. Same place, 11 p.m. I'm serious about the portrait. He stared at the message for 5 full minutes. Every instinct screamed this was a bad idea. Claire was Judge Hendrick's daughter. Her father represented everything Dante fought against with his art. Getting involved with her, even professionally, felt like betrayal. But another part of him, the artist part that had seen how moonlight transformed her face into living art, couldn't let it go. Before he could talk himself out of it, he typed, "Fine, but I paint what I see, not what you want." Her response came immediately. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." At his grandmother's house in Gadsden Green, Sunday dinner meant the whole family. His Uncle Raymond argued politics with his Aunt Joyce while his younger cousins fought over who got the last piece of cornbread. The smell of collard greens and fried chicken filled the small house, familiar and grounding. "You eating or just pushing food around?" His grandmother sat down beside him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Just thinking, Nana." "About what? Or who?" She smiled knowingly. Dante hesitated, then told her everything. Meeting Claire, discovering she owned his paintings, her request for a portrait. He left out whose daughter she was, but Dorothy had lived in Charleston for 73 years. She knew every family that mattered. "Hendricks," she said slowly. "That judge's child?" "Yeah." His grandmother was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded on the table. Those same hands he'd painted. "Baby, I taught you to see people, not just categories. But I also taught you to protect yourself. That family has power in this city. Real power. She's not like her father, Nana. She buys my work. She sees what I'm trying to say. Seeing and standing are different things." Dorothy's voice was gentle but firm. "White folks can afford to dabble in our struggle. They get to choose when to care and when to walk away. You don't have that luxury. Your cousin Marcus is still in prison because of her daddy." The words landed heavy. Dante knew she was right. But he also remembered the exhaustion in Claire's eyes, the way she'd owned her father's legacy instead of hiding from it. "I'm just painting her portrait, Nana. Nothing more." Dorothy touched his cheek with one scarred hand. "That's how it always starts, baby. Be careful. This city eats up black boys who forget their place. Don't let some white girl's guilt make you one of them." Claire Hendricks stood in her father's study in their historic home on South Battery Street, surrounded by mahogany furniture and leather-bound law books that cost more than most people's cars. The room smelled of old money and older prejudices, cigar smoke embedded in every surface, whiskey lingering in crystal decanters. "The gala seating chart needs your approval," her father said, not looking up from his desk. Judge Robert Hendricks, at 62, still commanded every room he entered, his silver hair and tailored suits projecting authority that had sent hundreds of black men to prison over 3 decades. Claire looked at the chart. Old Charleston families, prominent lawyers, politicians who traded favors like currency, every white face that benefited from the system her father enforced. "Looks fine," she said flatly. "You could show more enthusiasm." Now he looked up, his blue eyes sharp with disapproval. This celebration represents decades of public service. Public service. Claire bit back the bitter laugh. She'd spent the last 3 years reviewing her father's cases at the law library, case after case where he'd shown mercy to white defendants and harsh judgment to black ones. Different outcomes for identical crimes, all wrapped in legal language that made it seem fair. "I invited the Winthrop boy," her father continued. "Thomas. He's just made junior partner at his firm. Excellent family. Translation: white, wealthy, connected. Exactly the type of man her father expected her to marry. Thomas Winthrop was perfectly polite, perfectly boring, and perfectly comfortable with the way things were. He'd never questioned why his 3rd DUI got dismissed, while a black teenager got jail time for his first offense. "I'm not interested in Thomas." "Claire," her father's voice carried warning, "you're 32. It's time to settle down with someone suitable. Someone suitable. Someone who wouldn't challenge him, wouldn't question the system, wouldn't make him uncomfortable at dinner parties." "I need to go," Claire said, grabbing her bag. "Where? You've been disappearing at odd hours lately." "The gym." The lie came easily now. She'd been lying to her father for years, about law school, about moving back to Charleston, about everything that mattered. Her mother, Catherine, waited in the hallway, her face a practiced mask of Southern gentility. "Claire, darling, about the gala dress." "Whatever you pick is fine, Mom." Catherine's expression flickered, hurt beneath the polish. "You used to care about these things." "I used to care about a lot of things before I realized what they actually meant." Her mother flinched. 3 years ago, when Claire had moved back from New York, she'd tried to explain what she'd learned about their family's wealth, their position, the system that protected them while crushing others. Catherine had listened politely, then said, "That's all very unfortunate, dear, but what do you expect us to do about it?" That was the moment Claire understood she was alone in her own family. She drove through Charleston's historic district, where tourists photographed beautiful buildings built by enslaved people, where ghost tours told romantic lies about the antebellum South. The city's beauty felt like a crime scene, gorgeous and horrible all at once. Her condo in West Ashley was her escape, decorated with art the old Charleston families would call inappropriate. She had Dante's paintings, the grandmother's hands that told stories of survival, the barbershop that captured black joy in a city that tried to erase it. She'd paid cash for both, not wanting her father to see the credit card statements. At 10:45 p.m., Claire changed into running clothes and grabbed her keys. She was driving to meet a man whose cousin her father had destroyed, to pose for a portrait that would probably capture every complicated truth she couldn't say out loud. Her phone buzzed. Her best friend Amanda checking in. "Still disappearing at weird hours? Should I be worried?" Claire typed back. "Maybe. Doing something I probably shouldn't. Like trying to be honest for once." She drove toward Riverside Park, her heart beating faster with each mile. This was reckless. Meeting a stranger in the dark, someone who had every reason to hate her family. But Dante's paintings had spoken to something in her that had been suffocating under propriety and family expectations. When she pulled up, she saw him already setting up his easel, his movements efficient and practiced. The moonlight caught his profile, strong jawline, focused expression, artist hands that created beauty from pain. Claire's breath caught slightly. She hadn't let herself admit it before, but he was striking in a way that had nothing to do with what was proper or suitable or approved by her father's world. "You came," Dante said as she approached. "You doubted me?" "Yeah, actually. Rich white girls don't usually mean what they say." The words stung because they were earned. "Fair enough. I'm here to prove you wrong." Dante had painted dozens of portraits, but he'd never felt this nervous setting up his supplies. Maybe it was painting in secret moonlight. Maybe it was painting the daughter of a man he hated. Maybe it was the way Claire moved in the darkness, graceful and purposeful, like she belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. "Where do you want me?" she asked. The question was practical, professional, but something about it made Dante's pulse quicken in a way he refused to examine. On the bench, facing the harbor, he kept his voice steady, clinical. This was work, nothing more. Claire sat, and moonlight transformed her again. Dante began sketching the basic composition, his charcoal moving across canvas in quick, sure strokes. He'd trained himself to see subjects as shapes and shadows, to disconnect from the person and focus on the art. But Claire kept breaking his concentration. "Can I talk, or do I need to be silent?" she asked. "Talk. I'm just blocking in composition right now." He glanced up, and their eyes met for a second too long. Dante looked away first, frustrated at himself. "Why art?" Claire asked. "What made you want to be a painter?" Dante focused on his canvas, trying to ignore how her voice sounded different at night. Softer, more vulnerable. "My mom. She used to take me to the Gibbs Museum when I was a kid, before she got sick. She'd stand in front of paintings for hours, just looking. She said art was the only honest thing in the world. Couldn't lie, couldn't pretend to be something it wasn't. She was right. Yeah. Then she died when I was 12, and my grandmother raised me. Couldn't afford the museum anymore, but Nana bought me art supplies every birthday, every Christmas, even when she was working 3 jobs just to keep lights on." He looked up to check the angle of Claire's chin and found her watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "What?" he asked. "Nothing, just the way you talk about them. Your mother, your grandmother. There's so much love there. They're my family." He said it like it was obvious, but something in Claire's face suggested it wasn't. "You and your family not close?" Claire laughed, but it sounded hollow. "We're close in proximity. My father's study is 20 feet from my old bedroom. But actual closeness? No. We exist in the same spaces, follow the same routines, and never say anything true." Dante's charcoal paused mid-stroke. He knew that loneliness, had felt it in foster care before his grandmother took him in. That sense of being surrounded by people but completely alone. "Turn your face slightly left," he said, more to break the moment than because he needed the angle. She shifted, and moonlight caught her cheekbone, her jawline, the curve of her neck. Dante's breath hitched before he could stop it. This was a problem. He couldn't afford to see Claire as anything but a subject. Definitely couldn't afford to notice how beautiful she was, how the vulnerability in her eyes made something in his chest tighten. "You always paint at night?" Claire asked. "For the past 6 weeks, gallery rejections got too depressing. Decided if nobody wanted my work anyway, I'd paint what I wanted when I wanted. They're fools. They're successful. I'm the one painting in parks at midnight. Success and wisdom aren't the same thing." Claire shifted slightly. "My father's extremely successful. Celebrated, respected, powerful. He's also wrong about almost everything that matters." The bitterness in her voice surprised Dante. "Must be weird, hating what your own father stands for." "Do you hate what I stand for?" The question stopped him cold. Dante set down his charcoal, really looking at her for the first time since she'd arrived. "I don't know yet. Still figuring out who you are versus who your last name says you should be. Join the club. I've been trying to figure that out for 3 years." Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe. 2 people trying to be something different than what their circumstances demanded. Dante picked up his brush, mixing paint with more force than necessary. This was exactly what his grandmother had warned him about. Getting involved, getting curious, getting close to someone whose world was built on the suffering of people who looked like him. But as he painted the first strokes, the angle of Claire's shoulders, the way moonlight created shadows beneath her collarbones, he couldn't deny the truth that was emerging on his canvas. She was stunning, and not just physically. There was something in the set of her jaw, the defiance in her posture despite her delicate features, that suggested strength built from swimming against the current of her own privilege. "I'm not going to make you look pretty," Dante said, his voice rougher than intended. Claire smiled, and it transformed her face. "Good. I'm tired of pretty. Paint the truth." The portrait sessions became routine over the next 3 weeks. Every few nights, Claire would text Dante a time and he'd meet her at the park. They never discussed why it had to be secret, but both understood. Her father could never know, and Dante's family would never approve. During the day, Dante worked his warehouse job, loading trucks and pretending he wasn't thinking about the way Claire's laugh sounded in darkness, how she'd started opening up about her life in fragments that he collected like precious things. "My father wants me to marry Thomas Winthrop," she'd said during their 5th session. Dante's brush had paused mid-stroke, and he'd felt something uncomfortable twist in his stomach. "The lawyer? Junior partner at Charleston's most prestigious firm. Perfect pedigree, perfect politics, perfectly boring. You don't love him? I don't even like him. But that doesn't matter in my world. Marriage is business, alliance, maintaining the right social circles." Dante had wanted to ask if she'd ever been in love, wanted to know things that weren't his business to know. Instead, he'd said, "Must be exhausting, living for everyone else's expectations." Says the man painting in secret because galleries reject him. She'd nailed him with that one. They were both hiding different versions of themselves from worlds that wouldn't accept the truth. Tonight marked their 7th session. Claire arrived 15 minutes late, and even in the darkness, Dante could see the tension in her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked before he could stop himself. When had he started? "Caring? Gala's tomorrow night. My father's big celebration." She sat heavily on the bench. "I have to smile and play the perfect daughter while they toast a man who's destroyed lives." Dante mixed paint, fighting the urge to comfort her. "So don't go. That's not how my family works. Duty, obligation, maintaining appearances. It's all we know how to do." "Sounds like prison." Claire looked at him sharply, then her expression softened. "Different kind than your cousin's in, but yeah, sometimes it feels that way." They were quiet for a moment, just the sound of Dante's brush on canvas and water lapping at the harbor. He'd been working on her eyes tonight, trying to capture that specific shade of blue-gray that changed with her mood. "Can I see it?" Claire asked. "The portrait?" "Not until it's finished." "Why not?" "Because you'll have opinions, and this needs to be what I see, not what you want to see." She smiled, and Dante's heart did that thing again, that skip beat that he'd been trying to ignore for 2 weeks. Control freak. Artist. There's a difference. Barely. They fell into easy banter, the kind that had started developing around their 3rd session. Claire would tease him about his intense focus, and he'd mock her inability to sit still. It felt natural, comfortable, dangerous. "Tell me about your cousin," Claire said suddenly. "Marcus, if you want to." Dante's brush stilled. "Why?" "Because my father sentenced him. Because I've read the case file, and it's haunted me for months. Because I want to know who he was before my father decided he was just a case number." The raw honesty in her voice broke something open in Dante. He set down his brush and told her about Marcus, who'd been more like a brother than a cousin, how they'd grown up together engaged in green, playing basketball until streetlights came on, how Marcus had wanted to be a mechanic, had been good with his hands, could fix anything. "He got caught with marijuana," Dante said, his voice tight. "Not selling it, not distributing it, just had some in his car. Your father gave him 8 years. 8 years for something white college kids do every weekend at frat parties and get warnings for." Claire's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "I know. I read the transcript, and I read the case from 3 months earlier. White defendant, same charge, got probation and community service. So you know your father's a racist?" "Yes." The word came out broken. "I know exactly what he is. That's why I can't sleep, why I run at 3 a.m., why I'm sitting here in the dark with you instead of at home preparing to celebrate his career." Dante looked at her, really looked, and saw the weight she carried. It was different from his burden, built from different materials, but it was still heavy. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "In Charleston, near him in that world?" "Because running away is what privileged people do when things get uncomfortable. I'm trying to figure out if I can be different. If I can use my access, my name, my privilege to actually do something that matters." She met his eyes. "That's why I wanted you to paint me, to see if you could find something real under all this perfection I've been performing my whole life." The vulnerability in her admission made Dante's throat tight. He picked up his brush, needing to do something with his hands before he did something stupid like reach for her. "I see it," he said quietly. "The real you. It's all over this canvas." Claire stood, moving closer to where he worked. She was near enough now that he could smell her perfume, could feel the warmth radiating from her body. His hand trembled slightly, and he blamed it on the cool night air. "Dante," she said softly, and the way she said his name made something electric run down his spine. He looked up, and the space between them felt charged, dangerous. Her eyes held questions he didn't know how to answer, and his pulse hammered so loud he was sure she could hear it. "I should go," Claire whispered, but she didn't move. Neither did he. The moment stretched, taut and full of possibility, before Claire finally stepped back. "Same time Thursday?" Dante nodded, not trusting his voice. As she walked away, he realized he was in serious trouble. This had stopped being just a portrait weeks ago, and he'd been lying to himself about it. We're halfway through this transformation. Claire just revealed she's been reviewing her father's racist cases for years. Real question. Have you noticed how privilege lets people choose when to care about injustice? Share one thing you learned about systemic racism from someone in power. Top 3 insights get pinned. If this story is making you think differently, smash that like button and subscribe. The Hendricks Gala filled the Charleston Yacht Club with the city's elite, a sea of bow ties, designer gowns, and inherited wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over people who'd built their success on systems designed to keep others down. Claire stood beside her father in a champagne-colored gown her mother had chosen, smiling until her face ached. Judge Hendricks held court, accepting congratulations for 30 years of fair and impartial justice that was anything but. "Your father's a pillar of this community," Thomas Winthrop said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of wine. "Charleston's lucky to have men like him on the bench. Men like him. Code for white men who protected white interests while crushing black lives under legal language." Claire said noncommittally, accepting the wine she didn't want. "You look beautiful tonight." Thomas's eyes roamed over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "That color suits you." "Thank you. I was thinking perhaps we could have dinner next week. There's a new French restaurant on King Street everyone's talking about." Claire opened her mouth to deflect, but her father materialized beside them, his hand heavy on her shoulder. "Thomas, that's an excellent idea. Claire would love that. Wouldn't you, darling?" The pressure of his fingers carried clear command. "Say yes. Perform. Be what we need you to be." "Actually, I'm quite busy next week. Claire works too hard at that nonprofit," her father interrupted smoothly. "Always trying to save the world, but I'm sure she can make time for dinner with such a promising young man." Thomas smiled, confident and entitled. He'd never been told no in his life, had never had to work for anything he wanted. "Friday then? 7 o'clock? Before Claire could respond, someone tapped a champagne glass. The speeches were starting. 3 hours of powerful white men congratulating each other for careers built on inequality. Claire endured it, barely. Senator Morrison praised her father's tough-on-crime stance that had disproportionately imprisoned black men. District Attorney Caldwell commended his fairness despite case files that showed clear racial bias. Each speech was a masterclass in coded language that said everything while claiming to say nothing. When her father stood to speak, Claire felt physically ill. 30 years ago, I took an oath," Judge Hendricks began, his voice carrying authority that had silenced defendants begging for mercy, "to uphold justice without fear or favor, to be blind to all but the law." Blind. The word was bitter irony. Justice might be blind, but her father saw race clearly enough to sentence it differently. Claire's phone buzzed in her clutch. She glanced down subtly. "How's the celebration of injustice going?" Dante's text read. Despite everything, she smiled. She told him about the gala, and he'd made her promise to text if she needed an escape plan. She'd thought he was joking. "Kill me now," she typed back. "Can't. Need you to finish posing. Portrait's almost done. That's your only reason for keeping me alive?" There was a long pause before his response. "Ask me that when you're not surrounded by everyone I'm supposed to hate." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. She looked up at her father, still speaking about justice and fairness, and then down at her phone where the only honest words of her night glowed on the screen. "I need to see it. The portrait." "Not yet. Dante. Thursday. I'll have something to show you." The gala ended at midnight, but Claire stayed until 1 a.m., trapped by obligation and her mother's meaningful looks. By the time she got home, she felt hollowed out, scraped raw by hours of performing. She changed out of the gown and into running clothes, then drove to Riverside Park even though it was 2 a.m., and she wasn't supposed to meet Dante until Thursday. He was there anyway, painting something new by moonlight. "Couldn't sleep either?" Claire asked, approaching his easel. Dante didn't seem surprised to see her. Figured you'd need to scrub that gala off somehow. She sat on their bench. It had become theirs over the past month, claimed by repeated presence. It was worse than I imagined. 3 hours of celebrating systematic oppression like it was public service. Did you tell them that? And accomplish what? They don't want to hear truth. They want to maintain comfortable lies. Dante set down his brush, studying her in the darkness. You're angry. I'm furious. At them, at him, at myself for standing there silent. So stop being silent. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Hard but simple. Claire looked at him. This man whose cousin her father had destroyed, who had every reason to hate her but instead painted her portrait, who texted her during galas to make sure she was surviving. You make it sound easy. Never said it was easy. Just said it was simple. You decide who you want to be. Your father's perfect daughter who stays quiet, or someone who fights back. Fighting my father means losing my family. Maybe. Or maybe it means finding out who you really are when you stop performing for them. The words hit something deep. Claire had been performing her whole life. Perfect daughter, perfect student, perfect Southern belle. She'd moved to New York trying to escape, but when that failed, she'd come back and resume the performance. Meeting Dante had cracked that facade. His paintings, his honesty, the way he refused to make her comfortable, it all demanded she be real. Show me, she said suddenly. The portrait. I need to see what you see. Dante hesitated, then nodded. He pulled a canvas from his bag, and even in moonlight, Claire could see it clearly. She'd expected beauty. Instead, he'd painted conflict. Her face emerged from shadow and light, but it wasn't the polished perfection she maintained at galas. Dante had captured something raw, defiance in the set of her jaw, exhaustion around her eyes, strength in her shoulders that fought against the softness of her features. It was her, but without any pretense. Honest and complicated and real. Is that how you see me? Claire whispered. That's who you are, when you stop trying to be what everyone else wants. She looked at the portrait, then at Dante, and something shifted between them. The air felt charged, heavy with months of conversations and secrets, and growing something neither of them had named. Thank you, Claire said softly. For what? For seeing me? Dante's eyes held hers, and the space between them felt impossibly small. Claire's breath caught as she noticed details she'd been trying to ignore. The strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes, the way his presence made her heart race. Claire, he said, and her name in his voice sounded different than when anyone else said it. She stood, suddenly needing distance before she did something irreversible. I should go. But she didn't move. Neither did he. The moment stretched, taut with possibility, before footsteps echoed from the path. They sprang apart as a police officer rounded the corner, his flashlight sweeping the area. Park's closed, the officer said, his hand resting casually on his belt near his weapon as he looked at Dante. Claire's privilege kicked in automatically. Officer, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I asked my friend to meet me here. Judge Hendricks is my father. Perhaps you know him? The officer's demeanor shifted instantly at the name, his posture relaxing. Of course, Ms. Hendricks. No problem at all. Just doing my rounds. You folks have a good night. He walked away without even glancing back at Dante, and the contrast was stark. How quickly a white woman's name had diffused a situation that could have ended very differently for a black man alone in a park at night. That's what I meant, Dante said quietly after the officer left. Your privilege just protected me. You didn't even think about it. Just used his name like a weapon. Claire felt sick. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I know. That's the point. You don't mean to, but you do. Because that's how the system works. His name opens doors, gets you out of trouble, makes cops back down. Meanwhile, if I'd been here alone, that conversation would have gone very differently. The truth of it settled heavy between them. Claire wanted to argue, to defend herself, but Dante was right. She'd wielded her father's power without even thinking, the same power that had sent Marcus to prison. I hate this, Claire whispered. I hate that his name has that much power. I hate that I used it. I hate all of it. Hating it isn't enough. Dante started packing his supplies. You have to decide what you're going to do about it. Dante didn't hear from Claire for 5 days after the park incident. He told himself it was better this way. Cleaner, safer, smarter. They'd been playing with fire and the burn was inevitable. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. about the portrait he'd painted that captured her better than any photograph could, about the way she'd looked at him in the moonlight before the cop interrupted, about the almost moment that had hung between them, heavy with possibility. His phone buzzed during his lunch break at the warehouse. Claire's name lit up the screen, and his heart jumped before he could stop it. "Can we talk?" "Not at the park. Somewhere public." He should say no. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to walk away from Judge Hendrick's daughter and the complications she brought. But Dante found himself typing, "Meeting Street Coffee, 3 p.m. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table looking exhausted. No makeup, hair in a messy bun, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. She looked more real than she ever had at the park sessions. "Thanks for coming," Claire said as he sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "Almost didn't." Dante studied her face, looking for the angle, the performance. He found only raw honesty. "What's going on?" Claire pulled out her phone, opened a voice memo app, and slid it across the table. "I recorded my father yesterday, at home. He was talking to Senator Morrison about a case coming up, a police brutality lawsuit against Charleston PD. Listen." Dante pressed play. Judge Hendricks's voice filled the space between them, confident and casual. "The Martin case is a non-starter, James. I'll dismiss it in preliminary hearings. These people always claim excessive force, but the officers followed protocol. We can't have every thug with a camera phone thinking they can sue the department." Senator Morrison's laugh came through clearly. "Good man, Robert. Can't let them think they can challenge authority. Set the precedent early." "Exactly. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know how to handle these cases without it looking biased. Technicalities, procedural errors, statute of limitations. There are a dozen ways to kill a case before it reaches trial." Dante's hands clenched into fists. His jaw tightened as the recording continued with casual racism wrapped in legal language. Judge Hendricks and the senator discussing how to protect police who'd beaten a black teenager unconscious during a traffic stop. The recording ended. Dante looked up at Claire, whose eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "That's who my father really is," she said, her voice shaking. "Not the respectable judge everyone celebrates, that. A man who actively works to deny justice to people who look like you. Why are you showing me this?" "Because I need to do something with it, and I don't know what. If I leak it, I destroy my father, my family, everything I've ever known. If I don't, I'm complicit in every person he hurts going forward." Dante sat back, processing. This was bigger than portrait sessions and moonlight conversations. This was evidence of judicial corruption, of systematic racism from the bench. This could change things. "What do you want from me?" he asked carefully. "Tell me what to do. Tell me if using this makes me as bad as him, using people for my own agenda. Tell me if I'm doing this to ease my guilt or because it's actually right." "I can't tell you that. This is your choice, Claire, your family, your consequences. But it's your community he's hurting. You have more right to this than I do." Dante leaned forward, holding her gaze. "That's the thing about privilege. You get to choose whether to fight or walk away. I don't have that choice. I live with the consequences of men like your father every day. My cousin's in prison because of judges like him. But you? You could delete that recording, marry Thomas Winthrop, live in a big house on the Battery and never think about this again." Claire flinched like he'd slapped her. "You think that's what I want?" "I don't know what you want. That's the problem. I want to stop being afraid." Her voice broke. "I want to stop performing. I want to matter for something other than whose daughter I am. I want—" She stopped abruptly, looking away. "What?" Dante pushed. Claire met his eyes, and the vulnerability there stole his breath. "I want to be someone you could respect, someone who deserves the way you painted me. Strong and real and fighting instead of just talking about fighting." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Dante felt something crack open in his chest. The careful walls he'd built against exactly this feeling. "You want my respect? Leak the recording," he said quietly. "Take the hit. Face the consequences. Do the hard thing even though it'll cost you everything. And if I do, what happens to us?" "There is no us, Claire. There can't be. Your father destroyed my cousin's life. Your family represents everything I fight against in my art. This, whatever this is between us, it's impossible. But it exists anyway," Claire whispered. "You feel it too. I know you do." Dante wanted to deny it, But he'd never been good at lying. What I feel doesn't matter. The world doesn't stop being what it is just because we wish it were different. So we just ignore it? Pretend we don't... She stopped herself again. Don't what? His heart was hammering now, dangerous territory approaching fast. Claire stood abruptly. I need to go. I have decisions to make. She left the recording on the table and walked out. Dante sat there for 20 minutes staring at the phone that could bring down one of Charleston's most powerful men. His own phone buzzed. A text from Claire. The portrait. Can I have it when it's finished? Whatever happens next, I want to remember who you saw when you looked at me. Dante typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, It's already yours. Always was. He regretted hitting send immediately, but it was too late. The truth was out there, as dangerous and impossible as everything else between them. That night, Dante couldn't paint. He sat in his studio apartment looking at the portrait of Claire that had somehow become more than just an assignment. He'd painted her transformation, from the polished facade she wore at galas to the raw, complicated woman who recorded her own father to stop him from hurting people. She was beautiful. Not just physically, though moonlight had been kind to her features, but beautiful in her struggle, her conflict, her slow awakening to truths that shattered her comfortable world, and he was falling for her. Had been for weeks, if he was honest. Every midnight session, every conversation, every moment of her choosing to see instead of looking away, it had built something in him he couldn't paint away or ignore. His phone rang. Claire's name. I'm going to do it, she said without preamble. I'm giving the recording to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund tomorrow. My father will know it came from me. My family will disown me. But you're right. Choosing to look away makes me complicit. Claire, let me finish. I'm doing this because it's right, but I'm also doing it because I can't be someone you respect if I keep protecting a system that destroys people. And her voice caught. I care what you think of me, more than I should, more than makes sense. Dante closed his eyes, every warning his grandmother had given him echoing in his head. This is a bad idea. I know. Your father will come after you. He has power, connections, ways to make your life hell. I know that too. And even if you do this, it doesn't change what your family represents. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't make us... He couldn't finish the sentence. I'm not doing this to make us possible, Dante. I'm doing it because I finally figured out who I want to be. And she's the woman in your portrait, the one who fights instead of performing. The line went quiet, both of them breathing, both of them standing at the edge of something terrifying. I need to see you, Claire said finally, before I do this. Before everything changes, please. Every rational thought said no. Every bit of self-protection screamed to hang up, delete her number, walk away from this white girl whose privilege could shield her from consequences he'd face for the same choices. But Dante heard himself say, Riverside Park, midnight. Dante arrived at the park at 11:45, his heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the bike ride over. The portrait was finished. He'd worked on it obsessively for the past 6 hours, unable to stop until every detail matched the woman he'd come to know. Claire was already there, sitting on their bench, staring out at the harbor. She turned when she heard him approach, and even in darkness he could see she'd been crying. You okay? He asked, setting down his portfolio case. No, but I'm sure. She stood, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm April night. I meet with the NAACP lawyers tomorrow at 9. By noon, my father will know I recorded him. By dinner, I'll probably be disowned. You can still back out. I don't want to back out. I want to stop being the person who knows better but does nothing. She looked at him, moonlight making her eyes luminous. I want to be worthy of how you see me. Claire, show me first, the portrait, before I lose my nerve. Dante pulled out the canvas, and even he was struck by what he'd created. He'd painted Claire in moonlight, but she wasn't pretty or polished. She was powerful, defiant. The conflict in her expression spoke of internal war, privilege battling conscience, comfort fighting truth. Her eyes looked directly at the viewer, challenging, questioning, demanding they see her complexity. It was the most honest thing he'd ever painted. Claire stared at it for a long moment, silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. That's who I want to be. That's who you already are. You just spent 32 years hiding it. She looked up at him, and the space between them felt impossibly charged. Dante, I need to tell you something before tomorrow ruins everything. Don't. He knew what was coming, could feel it building like a storm. Don't say it. Why not? Because it changes things, makes them complicated. They're already complicated. Claire stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. I'm falling for you. Have been since that first night when you told me you'd paint what you see, not what I want. Maybe before that. Maybe since I first saw your painting of your grandmother's hands and realized someone in this city was telling the truth. Dante's breath caught. Every warning bell in his head was screaming, but his heart was louder. You're Judge Hendrix's daughter. I know. I'm a black artist who can barely pay rent. I know that too. The world will not be kind to us. When has the world ever been kind to people who refuse to stay in their assigned boxes? She had him there. Dante reached out, his hand hovering near her face, not quite touching. If we do this, there's no going back. Your family will hate it. My family will question it. People will say terrible things. Let them. Claire closed the distance, her hand covering his, pressing it to her cheek. I'm tired of living for everyone else's approval. The touch broke something in Dante. All his careful control, all his rational reasons why this was impossible. It crumbled under the weight of want. He'd been fighting this for weeks, denying the way his pulse jumped when she texted, the way he painted her from memory on nights they didn't meet, the way her laugh had become his favorite sound. Claire, he whispered, and her name was both warning and surrender. Tell me you don't feel this, she said, stepping closer still. Tell me I'm alone in this and I'll walk away. But Dante couldn't lie. Not to her, not anymore. You're not alone? Then stop fighting it. He should have pulled away, should have remembered his grandmother's warnings, his cousin in prison, the power imbalance that made this dangerous. Should have done 1,000 things that weren't pulling Claire closer, his hand sliding into her hair, his forehead resting against hers. This is a terrible idea, he murmured, his lips inches from hers. The best ones usually are. Dante kissed her. Soft at first, tentative, giving her chance to pull away. But Claire pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and honest. It tasted like moonlight and rebellion, like everything they'd been holding back for weeks finally unleashed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. We're really doing this? Unless you're smarter than me and run away. Too late for smart. He kissed her again, softer this time, sweet and lingering. I'm all in. Even though this is going to be complicated and hard and probably blow up in our faces. Claire smiled against his mouth. I don't care what anyone thinks. You're mine now. Possessive. You have no idea. She kissed him again, and Dante felt years of carefully maintained distance dissolve. He'd spent his whole life being told to stay in his lane, to accept limitations, to not reach for things that weren't meant for people like him. But Claire was reaching back, choosing him despite the cost, and that changed everything. They sat on the bench, Claire tucked against his side, his arm around her shoulders. It felt natural, right? Like they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. What happens now? Claire asked quietly. You blow up your life tomorrow by turning in that recording. And then? Then we figure it out as we go. Together. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in her scent. Fair warning. My grandmother is going to have opinions about this. Claire laughed. My father's going to have more than opinions. He's going to lose his mind. Good. Dante pulled her closer. Let him. Let them all talk. We know the truth. What truth? That this, us, it's real. It's not about guilt or rebellion or crossing lines to prove a point. It's just real. Claire turned in his arms, cupping his face with both hands. I love you. I know it's too soon and too fast and too everything, but I do. I love you. The words should have terrified him. Instead, they felt like coming home. I love you too, even though you're probably going to be the death of me. She grinned. What a way to go. They stayed until 3 a.m., talking and kissing and planning for the chaos about to descend. When Claire finally left, Dante watched her car disappear and knew his life had just changed forever. He texted his grandmother. Need to talk to you tomorrow. It's important. Her response came immediately, despite the hour. This about that Hendrix girl? Dante smiled. Of course she knew. Dorothy Brooks knew everything. Yeah, bring her to dinner Sunday. If you're going to break all the rules, might as well do it properly. The story broke on Thursday morning. Federal investigation launched into Judge Hendricks following recorded admission of judicial bias. By noon, every news outlet in South Carolina had picked it up. By evening, it was national news. Dante watched it unfold from his apartment, his phone exploding with calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. He ignored them all except Claire's. "How bad?" he asked when she called at 2 p.m. "I've been disowned, officially. My father had his lawyer deliver papers revoking my trust fund, removing me from the will, and requesting I cease using the Hendricks name in public." Her voice was shaky but determined. "My mother won't take my calls. My childhood friends have blocked me on social media. It's a complete excommunication. I'm sorry." "Don't be. This is what choosing truth costs. I knew that going in." She paused. "Can I see you? Where are you staying? They kicked you out of your condo?" "It was in the trust. Already had movers there boxing my stuff. I'm at a hotel on Savannah Highway, but I can't afford it for more than a few days." Dante made a decision that would have seemed insane a week ago. "Pack a bag. You're staying with me until we figure something out." "Dante, I can't ask you to—" "You didn't ask. I'm telling you. Get your stuff and come over." 2 hours later, Claire stood in his tiny studio apartment, looking around at the space that probably cost less per month than her father spent on cigars. "It's perfect," she said, and Dante could tell she meant it. "It's a shoebox with water damage. It's yours. That makes it perfect." She set down her bags and moved into his arms, and Dante held her while she finally let herself cry, for the family she'd lost, the life she'd walked away from, the certainty that had crumbled. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "We'll figure this out." Over the next week, they did. Claire got a job as a paralegal at a civil rights law firm. Less prestige than her family's firm would have offered, but actual purpose. Dante introduced her to his grandmother, who'd studied Claire with sharp eyes before nodding once and saying, "You'll do, but you hurt my grandson, and judge's daughter or not, you'll answer to me." Claire had laughed, the first real laugh since the recording went public, and said, "Yes, ma'am." They settled into a rhythm. Claire working at the law firm by day, Dante at the warehouse, both of them painting together at night. Claire had started creating art too, channeling her anger and grief into abstract pieces that Dante thought were brilliant. "You should show these," he said one night, studying her latest canvas, a riot of color that somehow captured rage and hope simultaneously. "Nobody wants art from a pariah." "Wrong gallery, then. We need to find the right people." That's when Dante got the email. A small gallery in North Charleston, black-owned, focused on social justice art, had seen his moonlight paintings on social media and wanted to do a show. "Voices from the margins, art as resistance. They want both of us," Dante said, reading the email twice to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. "You and me. A joint exhibition." Claire's eyes widened. "Seriously. Says here they love the narrative. Black artist and white ally using art to challenge systemic racism. They want the portrait of you as the centerpiece." For the first time since the recording dropped, Claire smiled genuinely. "Let's do it." The gallery opening happened 3 weeks later. Dante's Moonlight series hung alongside Claire's abstract rage pieces and the portrait of her that had started everything. The space filled with people, activists, artists, community members who'd been shut out of Charleston's elite galleries. Dante's grandmother stood in front of the portrait of Claire, studying it carefully. "You painted her truth," she said finally. "That takes courage for both of you." "Is this okay, Nana?" Dante asked quietly. "Me and her?" Dorothy looked at Claire across the room, talking passionately with a reporter about her father's corruption. "Baby, that girl gave up everything to do what's right. That's not privilege talking, that's character. You love her?" "Yeah, I do." "Then it's okay." She patted his cheek. "Just remember, love across the color line has always been revolutionary. People will try to make it about everything except what it is. Don't let them." The show was a success. 3 paintings sold the first night, including one of Dante's that went for more than he made in 2 months at the warehouse. The local news covered it, interviewing both artists about using art for social change. "This is your fault," a voice said behind them as they packed up that night. Dante turned to find Judge Hendricks standing in the doorway, his face red with barely contained rage. Claire went rigid beside him. "Father, don't." His voice was ice. "You've destroyed my career, humiliated this family, and for what? To play revolutionary with this He looked at Dante with undisguised contempt. "His name is Dante," Claire said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "And I love him. The recording destroyed your career because you're corrupt. I just provided evidence. You're making a mockery of everything I built. You built your career on racism and injustice. I'm just making sure everyone knows it." Judge Hendricks' jaw clenched. "You'll regret this. Both of you. Charleston doesn't forget." "Good," Dante said, stepping beside Claire and taking her hand. "We don't want them to forget. We want them to change." The judge looked at their joined hands with disgust and walked out. Claire sagged against Dante, and he wrapped his arms around her. "You okay, baby?" "Yeah." She looked up at him, and despite everything, she smiled. "I'm better than okay. For the first time in my life, I'm free." 6 months after the recording went public, Judge Robert Hendricks resigned from the bench under federal investigation. The cases he'd presided over were being reviewed for bias, with several convictions, including Marcus's, flagged for appeal. Dante sat in the visitor's room at Lieber Correctional Institution, watching his cousin process the news. "So I might actually get out?" Marcus asked, his voice disbelieving. "The lawyer Claire's firm assigned says you have a strong case for sentence reduction. Maybe parole hearing within a year." Marcus shook his head slowly. "That white girl really did that? Took down her own father? She's not just some white girl, cuz. She's my girl. And yeah, she really did that. Bring her next time you visit. I want to meet the woman crazy enough to love your stubborn ass." Dante laughed, the sound echoing in the sterile room. "She's pretty crazy. And brilliant. And—" He stopped, realizing he was grinning like an idiot. "You're in deep, man. All the way." Outside in the parking lot, Claire waited in Dante's beat-up Honda, working on her laptop. She'd traded her designer wardrobe for thrift store finds and seemed happier for it. She looked up when he opened the door, her face bright with questions. "He's good," Dante said, leaning over to kiss her. "His lawyer thinks 18 months max before parole. Your firm's doing incredible work." Claire's eyes shone. "That's what we do. Fix what people like my father broke." They drove back to Charleston, to the small house they'd started renting in Gadsden Green with money from Dante's art sales. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, old plumbing, a backyard that was mostly weeds. But it was theirs. Dante had quit the warehouse job to paint full-time. Claire's paralegal salary wasn't much, but between her income and his growing art sales, they managed. More than managed. They were building something real. That evening, they hosted their first community dinner, an idea Claire had pitched to the neighborhood association. 40 people crowded into their backyard, sharing food and stories and laughter. Dante's grandmother brought her famous mac and cheese. Local kids painted murals on old fence boards. Activists planned their next rally. "This is what community looks like," Claire said, watching a group of teenagers debate art techniques with Dante. "Not gallus and exclusion, this." Amanda, Claire's friend who'd stuck by her through the disownment, raised her drink. To Claire Hendricks, who gave up caviar for collard greens and somehow seems happier. To Dante Brooks, someone else added, who proved that black artists don't need white galleries to matter. They toasted, and Dante pulled Claire close, kissing her temple. "You good, babe?" "So good." She turned in his arms. "Are you?" "This is a lot different from midnight painting sessions. This is better. We're not hiding anymore." And they weren't. They walked through Charleston holding hands, ignoring stares and whispers. They showed up at city council meetings together, advocating for criminal justice reform. They painted side by side in what had become their shared studio, the second bedroom filled with canvases and possibility. The world pushed back, of course. Dante had been denied entry to 2 galleries who suddenly found his work not aligned with their vision once they learned about Claire. Someone had spray-painted racist slurs on their fence. Claire's former friends crossed the street to avoid her, but they also found allies. Other interracial couples who'd faced similar battles, artists who believed in their message, activists who saw their relationship as part of the broader fight for justice. Hello, the Shade of Love family. Claire and Dante just transformed personal love into community action. In your community, what's one realistic action someone could take to address judicial bias? Most practical idea gets highlighted. If this story has opened your eyes or heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. The Marcus Brooks case became a catalyst. When his conviction was overturned after review revealed judicial bias, it opened the floodgates. 23 other cases were flagged for similar patterns. All black defendants, all disproportionate. Sentences compared to white defendants with identical charges. Claire's law firm took on 6 of the cases pro bono. She worked 16-hour days, pouring everything she'd learned about her father's tactics into dismantling them. At night, she'd come home exhausted, and Dante would have dinner waiting. Nothing fancy, but made with love. "We got another one overturned," she said one evening, collapsing onto their second-hand couch. Tyrrell, Washington. Served 4 years for a crime the evidence barely supported. He's being released next week. Dante sat beside her, pulling her feet into his lap and rubbing them gently. "You're changing lives, babe." "We are. Your art got people paying attention. The portrait of me that went viral. That's what made people look at these cases differently. Art and activism working together." The portrait had indeed gone viral. A journalist had photographed it for a story about their relationship, and something about it captured the public imagination. This image of a white woman choosing truth over privilege, painted by the black artist who loved her. It became a symbol of the possibility of crossing lines, of choosing justice over comfort. Dante's career had exploded in unexpected ways. Galleries that had rejected him before suddenly wanted his Moonlight series. He'd turned them down and instead partnered with black-owned galleries across the South. His work sold well, but more importantly, it was shown in communities that rarely saw themselves reflected in fine art. "I got an invitation today," Dante said, handing Claire an envelope. "Community college wants me to teach an art workshop for at-risk youth." "Dante, that's incredible. 12 weeks, teaching kids that their stories matter enough to paint, that their perspective deserves space on canvas." He smiled, thinking about 12-year-old him who'd needed someone to say exactly that. Claire kissed him, tasting like coffee and determination. "You're going to change their lives." "We're going to change their lives. You're helping me design the curriculum, remember?" They'd become a team in ways Dante had never imagined possible. Claire's legal knowledge combined with his artistic vision to create programs that address systemic racism through both policy and culture. They gave talks at universities, wrote op-eds together, appeared on panels about interracial allyship and activism. It wasn't always easy. Claire's family still refused contact. Dante dealt with black community members who questioned whether loving a white woman meant selling out. They navigated microaggressions and outright hostility regularly, but they also found unexpected grace. Marcus, released after his conviction was overturned, had become one of Claire's biggest defenders. "She gave me back my life," he'd said at a community gathering. "I don't care what color she is. That woman is family." Dorothy had eventually warmed to Claire completely, teaching her to cook traditional recipes and sharing stories about Charleston's black history that no textbook covered. "You're not trying to save us," she'd told Claire one Sunday dinner. "You're standing with us. That's the difference." The first anniversary of the recording's release fell on a Thursday. Claire and Dante marked it by launching a nonprofit, Art and Justice Coalition, dedicated to using creative expression to challenge systemic racism and support wrongfully convicted individuals. Their board included Dorothy, Marcus, activists, artists, and lawyers. The office was a renovated storefront in North Charleston, walls covered in protest art and legal documents side by side. "Never thought I'd be running a nonprofit," Claire said at the opening celebration. "Never thought I'd be dating a nonprofit director," Dante replied, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Dating? That's all I am to you?" He spun her around, grinning. "Well, there's that ring I've been saving for." Claire's eyes went wide. "Dante Brooks, are you—" "Not yet, but soon, when the moment's right." He kissed her softly. "I want to marry you, Claire. Want to build this life we're creating into something permanent. Want to make you my wife and face down this messed up world together officially." She kissed him back, deep and sure. "Yes? I haven't asked yet. I'm getting my answer in early. Whenever you ask, yes." Around them, their community celebrated. Black and white, young and old, people who'd found connection across lines that were supposed to be uncrossable. It wasn't perfect unity. Tension still existed. Misunderstandings still happened. But they were trying together to build something better. And in the center of it all, Dante and Claire proved that love could be both personal and political, intimate, and revolutionary. 18 months after the recording that changed everything, Dante stood in the Riverside Park at sunset. Not midnight this time, but golden hour. The same bench where he'd first painted Claire now served as the backdrop for 75 guests gathered for their wedding. His grandmother sat in the front row, crying happy tears. Marcus stood beside him as best man, dressed in a suit for the first time in a decade. The groom's side held his family, his art collective, kids from his workshop wearing their best clothes. Claire's side was smaller. Amanda, a few brave friends who'd stuck by her, and surprisingly her mother. Catherine Hendricks had shown up that morning with a tentative smile and an apology 3 years overdue. "I've been a coward," she'd told Claire, "but I can't miss my daughter's wedding, even if her father refuses to come." Judge Hendricks was conspicuously absent, but Claire had made her peace with that months ago. Some bridges burned too hot to rebuild. Now, as the string quartet played and Claire appeared in a simple white dress that made Dante's breath catch, he forgot about everything except her. She walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away, because she'd given herself away the moment she chose truth over comfort. "You look stunning, baby," Dante whispered as she reached him. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Claire's eyes sparkled with tears and joy. "Ready to make this official?" "Been ready since that first night you caught me trespassing." The ceremony was short and meaningful. No traditional vows about obeying or being given away. Just honest promises about standing together against a world that would test them, about choosing each other daily, about building justice through love. When the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Dante pulled Claire close and kissed her like they were still alone in moonlight, like the 75 people watching didn't exist. The crowd erupted in cheers. At the reception in Dorothy's backyard, decorated with string lights and Claire's abstract paintings, they celebrated. Marcus gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about how Claire had given him back his freedom and his family. Amanda joked about how she'd known from the start they were falling for each other, even when they both denied it. Dorothy simply said, "My grandson found a woman who fights. That's all I ever wanted for him." As the sun set and fireflies emerged, Dante and Claire slow danced under the stars. Around them, their community mingled. Black and white, rich and poor, artists and activists and everyone in between. It wasn't perfect integration, wasn't proof that racism had ended, but it was real, messy, beautiful progress. "What are you thinking?" Claire asked, her head on his shoulder. "That 2 years ago, I was painting alone in the dark, convinced nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. Now I'm married to you, running a nonprofit, teaching art, watching Marcus be free again. It's surreal." "Good surreal or scary surreal?" "Both." He pulled back to look at her. "But mostly good. We did this, babe. We took something impossible and made it real." Claire smiled, the same smile he'd first captured in Moonlight. "We're just getting started. There's so much more to do." "I know. Criminal justice reform, arts education, all those cases still pending review." He kissed her forehead. "But tonight, let's just be newlyweds who are stupidly in love. Deal. Tomorrow we change the world. Tonight we dance." They swayed to the music, and Dante thought about the portrait that had started everything, the one that now hung in their living room, a reminder of who Claire had chosen to become. He'd painted her transformation, but she'd painted his too, in ways that had nothing to do with canvas. She'd taught him that some white people were willing to risk everything for justice, that love across the color line could be more than performance or fetish. It could be partnership, genuine and deep. That allyship looked like action, consequence, sacrifice, and he'd taught her, or maybe just revealed, that her voice mattered when used to amplify rather than replace. That privilege was only meaningful when given away. That real love required seeing and being seen completely. "I love you, Mrs. Brooks," Dante murmured. Claire laughed. "I'm keeping Hendricks, remember? Someone needs to rehabilitate that name." "I love you, Ms. Hendricks." "Better, I love you too, Mr. Brooks." Around them, Charleston hummed with its usual contradictions. Beautiful and broken, progressive and prejudiced, changing slowly but changing nonetheless. Judge Hendricks was gone from the bench, but the system he represented remained. The fight for justice continued daily, exhausting and essential. But here, in this backyard, in this moment, two people who shouldn't have worked on paper had built something undeniable. They'd face down family rejection, public scrutiny, systemic resistance, and their own internalized barriers. And they'd won, not because racism ended or prejudice disappeared, but because they'd chosen each other and chosen right action, again and again in moments big and small. As the night deepened and guests began to leave, Dante and Claire stood by the portrait of her that had brought them together. She looked different now than she had that first night. More confident, more grounded, more free. "You should paint a new one," Claire said. "Of both of us this time." "Yeah? Yeah. Show who we've become." Together, Dante pulled his wife close, kissed her thoroughly, and said, "I already started it. Wedding gift. I'll show you tomorrow." "You started our portrait and didn't tell me?" "Artist's prerogative. Plus, I wanted to surprise you." Claire shook her head, smiling. "You're impossible. You love it. I love you." They stayed until the last guest left, until Dorothy hugged them both and said, "Go on, get out of here. Start your life." They drove to a small bed and breakfast on Folly Beach, all they could afford for a honeymoon, but perfect nonetheless. In the morning, they'd return to the work, to court cases and art classes and community organizing, to the daily fight against systems that had crushed too many for too long, to building coalitions and challenging power and using every tool they had, art, law, love, partnership, to create change. But tonight, they were just Dante and Claire, newlyweds, artists, activists, two people who'd found each other in moonlight and chosen to paint a future brighter than the past that tried to define them. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Racism didn't disappear because they fell in love. Judge Hendricks didn't suddenly see the error of his ways. The world didn't transform overnight, but it was real, honest, true, and sometimes that was the most revolutionary thing of all. Subscribe for more stories of transformation and justice, because love across lines isn't just romantic, it's radical, and every story of choosing truth over comfort helps build the world we need. Thank you for being part of the Shade of Love family. Drop a "if this story moved you" and share it with someone who needs to believe that change is possible.